presentation. I always think it's a good idea when policymakers and innovators, companies, academics can get together and discuss important issues, because that's generally when the best decisions are made. Regulations shouldn't happen in a vacuum, and they tend to not. Capital formation doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it probably shouldn't. So, to the extent that we're all here, I think it's a good thing that we take advantage of the chance to really have robust discussions on the issues and help to inform all of the decisions and guidance we provide going forward. As was said, my name is Zachary Fallon. I am a principal and consultant at the consulting firm Quetzal Consulting, as well as its affiliated law firm Blakemore Fallon. These are basically startups in this space that the aim of which is to provide strategic business and legal advice to market participants in the cryptocurrency space. It's no big secret that there's a lot of uncertainty or perceived uncertainty and guidance needed. So, to the extent we can help, that's why we set up. My colleague Lori Rossini is here as well, and she'll be speaking later. So, hope you all can catch that presentation. Prior to starting this consulting firm, I was a regulator with the Securities and Exchange Commission for 9 years. I was not a member of the commission, I was a member of the staff. I started in the Office of Small Business Policy, I started in the Office of General Counsel in 2009 and worked there for 3 years before transitioning to the Division of Corporation Finance in the Office of Small Business Policy. While I was there, my primary focus was on capital formation for smaller companies, and with a focus on crowdfunding type rules that came out in 2012. Prior to my time at the Securities and Exchange Commission, I was in private practice in London and San Francisco for 3 years at a large law firm. As the deck suggests, today I'm going to give an overview, a high-level overview of capital raising pursuant to the U.S. federal securities laws. And I wanted to start by just asking the general question, why do we need securities laws? Right? I mean, why can't companies just go out and raise as much money as they can, as quickly as they can, from any investor without regard to information or accountability? Right? It's kind of a loaded question. The answer is pretty clear. Capital raising doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are other interests at play. There's investor protection concerns, and there's market efficiency and stability concerns. So to the extent that capital raising, the whole ecosystem, as my colleague was just saying, the whole ecosystem is a balance. So when the balance gets out of whack, bad things can happen. And which brings me to the point of the slide, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission itself was created during a time when that balance was out of whack. In the roaring 20s in the United States, were the roaring 20s because there was a lot of easy money, a lot of good times. That crash at the end of the 20s led to the Great Depression, and it was a crisis of confidence in the United States that needed to be rectified. And Congress did so by passing securities laws in the early 1930s, among a number of other financial regulations. But they passed the Securities Act of 1933 and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. The 33 Act dealt primarily with the offer and sale of securities, and the 34 Act dealt primarily with the aftermarket trading of securities. In the 34 Act, there also was a provision which created the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. These securities laws, the Exchange Act and the Securities Act, were primarily adopted to ensure that there was a regulated market within the United States, that capital markets would be regulated. They also were adopted to make sure that investors and market participants were provided with the information they need to make informed investment decisions, as well as to put some accountability on the part of those providing the information as an assurance that the information that is being provided could be relied upon in some fashion. So how do these laws help? Well, the primary reason these laws help is they instill confidence. They restored confidence in the U.S. capital markets on the part of investors so that they could re-enter the market and put up their retirement funds and know that the retirement funds weren't going to be spent by charlatans without regard to the fact that this is someone's life savings. So the confidence that it instills in the market is crucial. And we live in this blockchain is about decentralization and trustlessness, or not having to trust. Well, with humans and institutions of government, you do need trust. And so this is why the Securities and Exchange Commission has these laws, because they do instill a certain amount of confidence in what's happening in the market. Additionally, they provide a discipline for aftermarket trading participants to make sure that they are dealing with investors' capital in a fair manner. So what does the SEC do? Well, it has a tripartite mission. That is to protect investors, facilitate capital formation, and ensure fair, orderly, and efficient markets. The way in which it implements it is it has a robust oversight over the capital markets in the U.S. As the slide suggests, this is a slide from the SEC's annual report last year. They oversee securities firms, brokers, dealers, investment advisors, clearing agencies, transfer agents. They also oversee self-regulating bodies like the Financial Institutions Regulatory Authority, or FINRA, which also oversees broker-dealers. They oversee the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or the PCAOB, which helps deal with accounting standards for public companies. They implement, adopt, enforce, interpret federal securities laws and regulations to the benefit of the market. Again, this idea of instilling confidence through discipline. Now on to the capital raising, which is what the primary focus of what I'm going to talk about. The capital raising in the U.S. happens primarily pursuant to the Securities Act of 1933. One of the most fundamental concepts in the securities laws generally is that comes from the 33 Act, and that is the idea that every offer or sale of security, even if it's just to one person, has to either be registered with the SEC or conducted pursuant to an exemption from registration. Now that concept happens, it's not just about companies when they sell to the initial investor, it's also about that initial investor's resale to another person, and that person's resale to another person. The whole market, anytime you're interacting with a security, offer or sale, you have to either conduct that offer or sale pursuant to a registration statement or exemption from registration. Of course, the question that comes after that, if every offer or sale of security needs to be registered or exempt, then the threshold question then becomes, well, what is a security? A security is a broad definition. It's a statutorily defined definition, but not every term within the statutory definition is itself defined. Generally, a donation of money or a reward received in exchange for a donation, such as a t-shirt or coffee mug, is not considered a security without more. This is the type of thing that happens on websites like Indiegogo or Kickstarter when you donate to a campaign, perhaps a pre-purchase of a blender or the funding of your favorite coffee shop so that it doesn't go out of business. Those tend to be not securities. But the definition of a security is much broader than just your typical equity or debt, or as it says, stocks or bonds, and encompasses a wide range of instruments, any interest in a profit-sharing arrangement. It also has a term called the investment contract. Now, the investment contract is not defined in the statute, but the courts have come up with a definition that suggests an investment contract is a contract or transaction in which a person invests money in a common enterprise, is led to expect profits solely from the efforts of others. This, you've probably heard of this if you've been focused on U.S. securities laws at all. This is the so-called Howey test. And it's relied upon by the SEC not infrequently, in fact, probably almost exclusively with respect to the cryptocurrency-related enforcement actions it's taken in the last year or so. By the way, we'll talk more about this in a minute, but I just want to move on to highlight the overview of the securities laws generally, and we can talk about cryptocurrencies. So, you know what a security is, generally. As I said, you need to either offer it pursuant to a registration statement or an exemption from registration. So how do those work? Well, registration statements can be expensive. They can be a lengthy process, and they tend to be conducted by more mature companies ready to enter the public markets and have companies that have the discipline associated with being an ongoing regulated entity and an ongoing reporting company. So registration statements aren't typically practical for startups. But thankfully, there are a lot of exemptions from registration, which are tailored for companies based on different criteria that provide some flexibility under the regulatory regime, and we can go over those now. So here are some of them. There are some that are based in statute. There are some that are based in regulation, and there are others that are based in regulations adopted on the back of those statutes that interpret the statutes and provide guidance and sort of a framework around a vague statutory provision. The regulation may be robust and provide a lot of guidance to companies. Some of them are safe harbors. So you have statutory exemptions, you have regulations that are provide for exemptions or safe harbors. Perhaps the most relevant to this audience would be Regulation S, as in Sam or Soul. That regulation is a safe harbor from the registration provisions of Section 5 of the Securities Act. And if you have exemption from a safe harbor, basically provides that if you conduct the offering a certain way, it will be considered to be an offshore and overseas offering, and therefore not subject to Section 5 of the Securities Act, which would otherwise require registration of the offering. Now, the Regulation S has two safe harbors, basically. One is for the issuer, and one is for resale. So remember, I said before, every offer or sale needs to be exempt, or needs to be registered or conducted pursuant to an exemption. So the issuer safe harbor deals with the issuer and anyone involved in that distribution process, and the resale safe harbor involves those aftermarket resales by participants in overseas transactions. The two criteria for a Regulation S offering under either safe harbor are that the offering is conducted pursuant to what is called an offshore transaction, which generally involves not offering to U.S. persons or persons in the U.S., so it's not limited to U.S. citizens. It's broader than that. There could be, if you are a foreigner living in the United States and you're residing there, then Regulation S offering should not be happening to you. It should not be visible to you either. Same as if you're a U.S. person living abroad. So you can't be targeting U.S. persons or persons in the U.S. The other requirement is that there be no directed selling efforts in the U.S., which is somewhat similar provision, but generally you want to look at Regulation S and figure out if it complies, if your offering complies. Now, for those looking to offer and sell to U.S. persons or persons in the U.S., typically you ask a basic question, which is of a company before you get into all these options. You would ask, do you, as a company, have access to wealthy, sophisticated investors in the United States, so-called accredited investors? And if you do, if you have a network of accredited investors, then you probably don't need to go much further than to offer pursuant to what's called private placement, where you sell to persons with whom you have a pre-existing substantive relationship, and that are either accredited or sophisticated persons. If you don't have access to that, and many startups don't, then, or perhaps you have a business reason why you want to reach a broader set of persons, then in recent years, and this is when I was at the SEC, Congress adopted what is called the Jumpstart Business Startups Act, which added additional exemptions from registration that the Commission filled out in their regulations. And those are on the set here. It's 506C, which allows for general solicitation, so you can broadly solicit your offering to anyone, provided you only sell to accredited investors and you take reasonable steps to verify the accredited investor status of those purchasers. The second exemption, which is a new one, is Regulation Crowdfunding. This was also part of the Jobs Act. Regulation Crowdfunding allows companies to raise up to $1 million, slightly over $1 million, through a regulated intermediary platform. So these are online-only offerings. And the investors are subject to investment limitations, so they can't just go full bore in. They have certain thresholds below which they can invest their capital. And it also ensures a crowd, right? If you force limitations on the amount of people who can invest, the amount of capital that can invest, it's going to take more people to get to $1 million. And the idea there being that if you actually have a crowd, the crowd can help vet the idea before the offering goes live. If $1 million or $1,070,000, which is the actual one, isn't enough, There's Regulation A, which is the third one that was amended in the Jobs Act. Regulation A is similar to a registration statement, but it's not quite as robust, and you can raise up to $50 million in a 12-month period pursuant to Regulation A. You would be subject to ongoing reporting, and the offering is subject to review by the SEC. But on the back of that, you get freely tradable securities or unrestricted securities, which allow for, in the token space in particular, the tradability of that aftermarket is an important feature. So Regulation A has become quite popular in people thinking about what the best regulatory set is for them. The others have to do with intrastate offerings. So if you're just in California and you want to sell to only people in California, it's a large market, then you might be able to do an intrastate offering pursuant to 3A11, the 147 or 147 CAFE. They're slightly different, but all related. So how do the securities laws interact with blockchain technology? Well, there's nothing inherent in blockchain technology that implicates the securities laws. The securities laws tend to be implicated because of the actions of companies and the digital assets they create and the way in which they market and sell those digital assets. But the federal securities laws have existed since early 1930s. Obviously, blockchain technology wasn't around then. It is a concept that is independent of blockchain. What happens is when the two intersect, is where there is a perceived uncertainty. But the securities laws hold pretty firm, and the definition of a security is not likely to change under US law anytime soon. So the most important thing for companies in this space is to, I would say, be careful how they implement their ecosystems, their networks, or their decentralized applications on a network, and to think about the ways in which their own actions and the financial incentives they set out within their ecosystem may have an impact on the securities laws analysis in the US. But digital assets are not always securities. Bitcoin, for one, in my view, my personal view, is not a security because it, as I see it anyway, and there's been no official pronouncement from the SEC, so this is just me speaking, but as I see it, it doesn't pass the Howey test, primarily because it's the way in which it's mined, the way in which it comes into the market, is based on the efforts of the people who actually do the mining, rather than someone who created the Bitcoin system itself. But so what are the things that companies can do to help avoid securities laws implications with respect to the digital assets that they hope and intend to offer? Well, one of the things is the way in which you market the offering. Now, are you marketing the offering as an investment opportunity itself, the digital asset that is? Or are you marketing the ecosystem that's being created, the use case that's being created? If you're marketing these digital assets as a great investment opportunity, you're likely offering a security. Because the expectations you're setting in people's minds is that this asset will appreciate in value such that they can sell it at a profit through really just holding it. That's different than marketing the company as a use case. That this token or coin has an actual function in an existing ecosystem that is valuable, file storage or something along those lines. So the way in which you market it is really important. So anyone functioning in the ecosystem should be very careful about that. The expectations that are set is very important. Now, the other thing is who are you selling to? Are you selling to just anyone willy-nilly, or are you selling to potential users? Do the people to whom you're selling actually have a demonstrated need for the coin or the token or the asset that you're selling? Or are you just selling to people who are speculating? If it's the latter, again, you're likely setting yourself up to have a securities law conclusion in the US, rather than the former, which is a good fact to help you potentially, and this is all potentially, but potentially navigate out of the securities laws. If you're a company creating an ecosystem and you issue a bunch of digital assets, are you holding a bunch of digital assets back? Are you sitting on a bunch in treasury? And if you are, why are you doing that? Because the expectation that the flows from that is that you have the ability to potentially manipulate the price of the asset because you're holding onto a large portion of those in reserve. And people, on the flip side, people are relying on you for the value of the asset to begin with, because that you are primarily a holder of those, and the way in which a dribble amount is important with respect to the price. These are just some of the things you can consider when you consider whether or not the digital assets that are being created are securities, and the ways in which you could potentially onboard them. Because I think what's really important is to remember the financial incentives that you're creating in the ecosystem will come to bear upon the securities laws analysis. In closing, and otherwise I could stay up here all day talking. In closing, the companies who are contemplating the issuance of digital assets should frankly speak to a securities laws attorney. And that's just not just an attorney in the U.S., but that's an attorney in any jurisdiction in which you're offering. Because as you know, each jurisdiction has its own laws. And you want to be careful. Even if you think, oh, I'm conducting this offering pursuant to Regulation S in the United States, I'm fine. Well, the implication there is, what's implicit in that is that you're conducting it in a compliant fashion in some other jurisdiction. Now, there are more crypto-friendly jurisdictions overseas, so perhaps those are an option, but it's hard to imagine those offerings happening exclusively within that in one given jurisdiction. So you have to think about the ecosystem and globally, and so securities laws could apply in any number of different ways in different places.